Welcome to Westmoreland Community Connections, a look at issues and happenings on Classic Hits 107.1 WHJB. Here now is your host, Chad Amond, President and CEO of the Westmoreland County Chamber of Commerce.
Hello and welcome to Westmoreland Community Connections. My name's Chad Amond. I am President and CEO of the Westmoreland County Chamber of Commerce. It's my pleasure to welcome Jimmy Lee Santarella to the show today. Jimmy Lee is a sports broadcaster, incredible connections all across Westmoreland County. Jimmy, thanks for being on the show today.
Oh, thank you very much.
So let's talk a little bit about you. Tell us a little bit about your background, how you got into sports broadcasting. I understand that you might have played a few games of baseball in your life.
Yeah, well, me, Jimmy Lee Santarella from Greensburg, born and raised, played some minor league ball, which was I'm very happy about. And that, I think, actually got me into where I'm at now in the sports broadcasting.
Well, talk about that. Talk about a little bit more of what you did when you played professional. It's professional baseball, right?
Actually is, yeah.
You got paid. If you get paid, I don't care if it's a nickel. If you're getting paid,
that was about what it was.
Is that what it was?
Yeah.
Well, if you're getting paid, it's professional baseball, and that's a big plus.
Well, I was signed by Cleveland Indians, and I played my single A short season for the Tempe Utes out in Tempe, Arizona, and then I was picked up by the single A club, the San Jose Bees. Played under Gomer Hodge, who was a very good Major League Baseball player for the Cleveland Indians. Played for him at San Jose for a year. Then I moved me up to Williamsport. I was a Williamsport Tomahawk for a year. It's 1976. Then they moved to Jersey City, and that happened to be the first year that I hurt my knee. And so I didn't play the first year, and I was actually rehabbing. I was back in Greensburg, and I believe that was the year that I coached my first Little League baseball team.
So how did it go? It's a lot different coaching those kids as opposed to playing, right?
Whoa, yes. Well, I was kind of lucky because the kids that I had, my cousin actually called me up one day and asked me if I could coach the team since I'm not doing anything, and they didn't have a coach.
And this was in Greensburg?
This was in Greensburg, actually Southwest Greensburg.
Yeah. And
it just happened to be that I had to go to a meeting in 2 days for our draft. I had no idea who these kids were, who to pick. I didn't know. So he gave me a list of kids. Maybe these are the ones you want to try. They're the better players. But I actually got about maybe 3/4 of the team that we wanted to get. And one of the kids that I had was my shortstop / second baseman, one more second baseman. And he actually, through the years, became one of my best friends. And he was on the first team I coached, and I actually coached his son. You know, we both coached because he was one of my assistants.
Right.
And for the last 3 or 4 years that I coached, his son was on our team.
No kidding.
Yeah,
so
generation to generation.
It came full circle. So what? You're a sports broadcaster. You're obviously into baseball. You've played professional baseball. When you were up in Williamsport, did you? What field did you play on? You didn't happen to play on that field that the Pirates played on a couple of weeks ago, did you?
Yes, we did. Bowman Field. It was actually different. They renovated. They put a lot of money into it, and we were on a minor league field, which was nice. The grass was nice, but the fences were so far back. I believe, and I'm not sure for sure, but I want to say that the left field line was 425 whenever we played out there.
The left field line was 4 1/4?
Yeah, it was huge.
Wow.
And center field where I played, I want to say it was, I don't even remember, 440 maybe, high 430s.
Did you ever see anybody put it out?
I only ever pitched to one guy who made it to the majors, and he was only in the minor leagues this is a great story, for a couple of weeks till they made a roster move. Dave Winfield.
Oh.
And the ball was probably in space by now. He crunched it.
No kidding. Yeah. So all of the broadcast that you've done, I understand there has recently a milestone.
Yes, I just happened to be just broadcast my 1,000th career game for WHJB. I have a total of 1,737 games, but 1,000 now with WHJB, and it happened almost to the day as my very first game with WHJB.
Now, how do you? Congratulations.
Well,
Let's say first, congratulations. Now, how do you keep track of that? Because I with what I do with the chamber, so I go to a lot of business mixers and things like that. And I have to be coming up on maybe 1,000, but I didn't keep track of that. When did you decide to keep track?
from day one.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. What happened was Ralph Condy, who was big in high school sports, my cousin, and he had called me up one day. It was a Friday, August 31st, 1990. And he says, "What are you doing tonight?" I said, "Nothing." He goes, "Go to Jeanette." All right. What am I going to Jeanette for? He says, "Help Donnie." That's his son, Donnie, Don Condy. So I said, all right. So I went to the high school. There's nobody around, and nobody had cell phones back then. Nobody had nothing. So I had to go back home, call Ralph up and say, "I'm at the high school. Nobody's there." He goes, "No, you idiot. Go to the football field."
Oh, right.
Yeah. So as I'm talking to him on the phone, he told me, "You're going to be doing this for a while. Keep track of where you go and how many games you do." That was it.
And he told you from the very beginning.
Very first game.
So there was no training involved. There was nothing that you didn't go to broadcast school or anything.
Well, no. But the training came when I was a kid.
Okay.
Ralph used to take me to games that he would broadcast, and I would watch him do things. And I'm talking 8, 9, 10 years old.
Yeah.
So that's basically where my training came from.
So what is the trick? I mean, what is that training? I mean, how do you make sure you're broadcasting a game that you're not seeing these kids every day? It's not like you're going into Heinz Field and everybody knows that Roethlisberger's the quarterback and AB is the wide receiver and Le'Veon Bell is the running back. How do you keep track of all these kids? How do you pronounce the names right? Or
well, a lot of studying, a lot of footwork, a lot of computer stuff. Mostly when I go to my routine is on Wednesdays, I go to the teams, like our visiting team. I interview the coach and then I get pronunciations from there. Thursdays, I go to the home team. Same thing. Interview the coach, get pronunciations, starting lineups. I get all that stuff. And then what I do is I study them. And when I put them on my charts, my cheat sheets, if you want to call them, I phonetically spell everything. So it makes it a little bit easier.
You're listening to Westmoreland Community Connections on 107.1 WHJB and on the web at WHJBFM.com. We're talking with Jimmy Lee Santarella. Jimmy Lee is a local guy, grew up in Greensburg, played professional baseball, and is celebrating over 1,000 broadcasts of, was it all high school football?
Actually, no. It's
all
a mix
kinds
of
games.
all games. I actually have how many baseball games, football games, basketball games.
We'll talk a little bit about how you pick the games that you are going to broadcast.
All right, well, that's a good question. What I do is beginning of the season, I have to actually wait until all the schools in the WPIL mix together and publicize the master schedule. And then what I do again is I look at our area, our listening area. And
what is that? What is that listening area?
That would
Just
be all Westmoreland County. Yeah.
Okay.
So what I end up doing is now there are actually like 6 or 7 local high schools in our area. You got Norwin, Penn Trafford, Franklin Regional, Jeanette, Greensburg Central Catholic, Greensburg Salem, and Hempfield. And what I try to do is mix those teams in and try to do an equal amount, of games per year if I can. So what I do is, because I have to look, because we're not going to travel. We used to do that a long time ago, but now we just do home games. So I have to look in each one's schedule, who's home, on this date, and then from there try to pick out the best game. And we have to refer to either last year's games matchup between the two teams, or I actually have books I keep in my house that's the history of all these teams from day one, their very first football game.
Of high school?
Of high school.
Of high schools.
Yeah, and then what I do is I go back and see on a history, like an average, all right, which is the better game? And it usually ends up working out pretty well.
No kidding. So you do a lot of research in this. And
yes. I've been at it for 2.5 months, and we haven't even started really our full season yet.
Yeah, right. Well, to talk about a little bit of some of the games that you are anticipating this year, who do you expect is going to be the best team in Westmoreland County, or can you even do it that way? Because now at this point, you've got what, 6 divisions in the WPIAL?
Yeah, I got 6A, 5A, 4A on down.
Yeah. So what do you expect? What are you expecting this year?
It's tough. It's so, with all these new alignments, everything is so tough to gauge, because it used to be when it was just 4 classifications, you knew Hempfield, Penn Trafford, who was in 4. Hempfield was in 4. Penn Trafford was in 3. You have Franklin Regional in 3. Those 3 teams always were pretty decent. Hempfield just recently, over the last 4 years, has been really coming along. Greensburg Salem's up and down. You look at that, but you look at the history of the two games that are being played and how they do. Like our first game this year was Greensburg-Salem at Hempfield. Week 0, it counts, but it's just a rivalry week, and it's just a tradition. And we've done that at WHJB forever.
Right, and they allowed that to come back. They call that Week 0.
Week 0.
I grew up and went to Derry High School, and so I think Latrobe and Derry are allowed to play again now.
Yes, they're playing.
How do people even realize? I mean, if you're not really hardcore into the high school sports, how do you even think of who the teams play anymore? I mean, it's difficult to understand. Like, how do they make sure, or how do they qualify or quantify what district or what classification you're going to be in?
Well, they go by a percentage of boys and girls in your high school play sports. So, of course, the bigger the teams like Hempfield, who has 1,400 kids graduating, basically, they will look at the boys against the girls and then say, well, there's 500 of these, and we'll say 400 of the girls. Mm-hmm. So they say, okay, that's in a classification because of their numbers, 6A. Where you go to Jeanette, which is a Class A team, there's only maybe 150 kids in their graduating class, and out of the 150 kids, there might be, let's just say, 60 boys over 30 girls. So then that qualifies you as a single A, and that's how they classify them.
What do you see as the trends in high school athletics?
Changes. They change constantly because of you're always, not always, I should take that back. It seems like every 2 or 3 years they're changing classifications. They're taking this school out. And again, Jeanette, who's a single A team, they play in double A. You're allowed to move up.
Oh, you can move up.
You can move up,
right.
But you can't move down. You can't be a single or a double A playing single A. Okay, it's just not a good advantage.
Well, it seems like Jeanette is always cranking out somebody that's going to a Division I school. I mean, Terrell Pryor is probably
coached Terrell Pryor.
Oh, did
that
you
was
really?
One of my coaching things. I coached 37 years of baseball. He's never played baseball, but I coached him in football.
Wow.
Yeah, when he was a little midget kid.
Yeah. No kidding.
Yeah.
Well, even though he probably had never played baseball, he would probably be an all-star on the team. It just seems like you probably see this, right? The kids that are good athletes,
they're athletes.
In whatever, there'll be an athlete in baseball, there'll be an athlete in basketball. They could probably be the all-star in any of the other sports, right?
Terrell actually, focused on basketball and football. His baseball skills, let's just say that he can field and he can throw.
We're talking with Jimmy Lee Santarella, a sports broadcaster. You're listening to Westmoreland Community Connections on 107.1 WHJB and on the web at WHJBFM.com. We'll be right back after these messages.
This is Westmoreland Community Connections on Classic Hits 107.1 WHJB. If you have a suggestion for a topic, or if your nonprofit organization would like to be featured on this program, call us during regular business hours at 724-216-1200.
Welcome back. You're listening to Westmoreland Community Connections. I'm Chad Amond, President and CEO of the Westmoreland County Chamber of Commerce. We are talking with Jimmy Lee Santarella. Jimmy is a coach. He's a professional athlete. Maybe a retired professional athlete.
Was.
And but most importantly, Jimmy talks about the volunteer work that he does to help youth sports in our community. Jimmy, tell us a little bit more about how you do volunteer coaching and what it means to you.
Means a lot to me. I've done it for 37 years now. I haven't done it. This is my 4th season that I haven't done it. Just scheduling and everything, and I loved coaching. That was my big thing. I would ask anywhere. Greensburg, mostly I coached in Jeanette. I coached in Derry. I want to coach. What do you have for me? And they would set me up with a team. And for 37 years, I've coached. I think I've coached my best to teach these kids. And I was one of the few kids, and I don't want to put any of the coaches, the volunteers down, because most of your coaches are there because of their kids are playing. I never coached my kids.
Right.
That was a strict rule for myself, except one year when I was in Derry. They said, listen, because I told them I didn't want it. My son plays. I don't want him on my team. And they said, well, we have a rule here that if you have relatives, they will be on your team.
So
I assigned my other coaches, here, you play with him. I don't even want to know what's going on.
Right.
But and I don't want to be, and I've never have accused of being biased, playing favoritism, and I don't do that. My thing when I coached, I taught the kids as best I could. I mean, I just would teach them fundamentals: fielding, throwing, batting, batting stance. We worked on batting stance. We worked on throwing styles. I mean, whatever worked for the kids, because not all kids can throw and bat and field the same way. It's all different. You have on your team, if you have 15 kids, you got 15 different personalities, and you have 15 different ways of kids playing, and you got to try to mix all that up and basically form into one. And I was proud that I was able to do that the best I could. I don't know. I just really enjoyed coaching, and I started off at the T-ball and worked my way up through. In the last probably I think 10 or 15 years, I coached the Colts and the Ponies, which is the Ponies are like the 13, 14, 15s. The Colts are 15, 16, 17.
Right. Pony is where they host the World Series in Washington every year, right?
Well, there's a Pony League World Series, and then there's a Little League World Series. The Pony League and the Little League is going on right now. Pony Leagues are the 14-year-olds. The Little Leagues are like the 12-year-olds.
Right. And
Williamsport is where that was another thing when I played ball for up in Williamsport. One of our things we had to volunteer to go over to the Little League World Series fields and work, and that's what we did. And my job every year up here was to ride in a golf cart. I didn't even get to drive it. Yeah. Just change the garbage bags out of the cans and supply the concession stands.
We're in mid-September right now, but if next year, for our listeners, I've been up to Williamsport a number of times. There's a lot of state meetings up in Williamsport. It must be an easy place to get to for everyone around the state. And so I have an opportunity to go up there a good bit. That facility, that Little League World Series
class,
it is just something else. I mean, I thought the first time I went up, I went into the museum and I thought, I'll be in here for 15, 20 minutes. I was there for 3 hours, and it is just it's mind-boggling.
Yeah.
It goes back to like the
1800s.
Yeah, it's something else.
It's a long, long time, and there's been a lot of professional athletes come through that Little League facility.
You're listening to Westmoreland Community Connections. We're talking with Jimmy Lee Santarella. Jimmy Lee is a sports broadcaster, a volunteer coach. He's very ingrained with the youth athletics of Westmoreland County. You talked about you never, except for one time, coached your kids, and so I have 4 kids. We play sports, and I can imagine that it is very difficult for a parent that is a coach coaching their kid to be in the middle on the kid, because I've seen it on both directions. Sometimes the coach thinks that their kid they need to play the top spot and they're the best, and then sometimes the kid that is the coach's son or daughter gets hollered at more than any of the other kids. How do you balance that if you're a volunteer coach?
That's a hard question for me because I've really never had to do it, but you can see yourself being hard on your kid because you want them to succeed, but on the other hand, you don't want to take away from his ability, because if you start yelling at him or you're picking on him all the time, we'll just say, then all of a sudden his self-confidence drops because now he's thinking he's not doing, as good as he thought he was doing. And, there's a very fine line between that. You're concentrating, again, if you have 15 kids on a roster, you just can't be looking at your son or your daughter all the time. You have to look at the 15 kids. And you got to worry about them. And as the type of coaches that I was, I'm trying to teach each one individually with special one-on-one time with each one. And if you would go with your son, and maybe that 5 minutes that you're doing with everybody else goes into 6 and 7 and 8 minutes, now all of a sudden you got the parents saying, nah. So I try to stay away from that. And that's why the 1 year in Derry that my son was on my team, I gave his responsibility to another coach. I didn't even want to know he was on the team other than seeing his name or seeing him. Right. That was it.
Well, I know that there's a facility in Westmoreland County because our son plays baseball a good bit, and we go all over these facilities. And there's a sign that at one, I think it might be in Penn Township. It says, "If you don't volunteer, don't complain." So
bingo.
Maybe that's some of the best advice.
One of the things I used to do was, with these younger kids, I haven't done it for a while because I actually lost a sign that I made up. I actually made up a piece of wooden sign that I engraved on it. to teach the kids, you know what, we're supposed to have fun here. So I used to hang this thing on the backstop, and it said, baseball was a game. Games are supposed to be fun.
Yeah,
That's
some good advice. Well, give some other advice. What advice do you have? You've done this for 37 years. You've been a volunteer coach. You've been around athletics. Sounds like all of your life. What advice would you give to those young parents that are coming up? You know, their kids getting into, whether it be basketball, baseball, football, whatever it is, they're volunteering as a coach. What's some of the advice that you would give them?
I've done this a lot. I tell them, so listen, I really, really appreciate you coming in here and volunteering your time, but this is not about you and your son playtime in the backyard. That's different. What you need to do is concentrate on the team. Your son, if he does or if he doesn't, is not going to be a Hall of Famer. More than likely, he's not. He might be the Hall of Famer on the team. You don't know until the end of the season. Treat your son and the other kids the same way, and just coach. And while you're coaching, when you have that coach's cap on, you don't have a son on this team. And believe me, I've had so many parents come up to me and say, you're going to love the way my kid plays. And it's got to be one of the least talented kids I have, but you know what? You work on that kid, and you work and make him a little bit better, and have the parents proud. And this is what you got to tell the other coaches. Work with everybody, just not with your kids, and just do the best you can and have them do the best they can. If they mess up, you don't tell them. You don't yell at them in front of anybody. You know what? You just let it go. Okay, guys, let's get them next time, or there's another inning or whatever. If you want, at the end of the game, when you're walking to your car, that's when you have your talk with your son or in the car.
Jimmy, what would you tell them not to do?
The coaches?
Yeah.
Don't yell. Don't scream. Teach. I've never yelled at any of my kids, and I never will. That's belittling them, and then their self-confidence, like I said earlier, is going to drop. It's a game, and if you're learning to play a game, you don't want to be yelled at. If it's you as a coach, you don't want to be yelled at as a coach, and you don't want the kids to be yelled at. You just have fun. That's what it's about.
You've done this for a lot of years.
Oh, yeah.
You've got to have some great stories.
I got tons of stories.
Any stories that are appropriate for radio?
99% of them are.
Okay.
How's that?
Let's give the listeners one.
All right. I had this one. We're not going to mention names.
Okay. Yeah.
I love these kids. Every one of them.
We won't even mention school districts.
Yeah. You know what? I'm going to give you two little quick stories. The one I'm going to say was a kid that played on my team. Actually, the first year he played for me, I had to kick him off the team. I've never, ever kicked anyone off the team before in my life. He was that disruptive. He was yelled and screamed and swore at us, at the coaches. And he was a 13, 14-year-old kid. And I told his parents, I said, I can't have him disrupting anymore. He's gone. The very next year, I get my roster and I see his name on there. All right, so I have what we call a powwow. I got that from my Indian days. We have our meetings. We call them powwows. I always have a powwow, meet the kids, meet the parents, because I invite the parents. And I actually had a talk with this kid alone. I said, listen, I will accept you back, but you need to apologize to your teammates for last year. I don't want an apology. I want you to apologize to your kids. And he looked at me and says, okay, coach. So we went out in front of everybody, and he made about a 10-minute speech.
Wow.
It was really great. And he was still one of those ball players that he was an average ball player, okay? And one of the last games of the season, he come up to me, and he struck out a lot. And he says, Coach, what am I doing wrong? I said, why can't I make contact? He goes, I'm striking out a lot. And I says, well, I keep telling you about your hips, adjust your hips a little bit. He took the third pitch deep, about 30 feet over the fence.
No kidding.
He crunched it.
Yeah.
And the smile on his face was just, it was good. The other story is coaching a kid. He was a young kid. This is the 12-year-olds. And again, to this day, probably the least athletic person I've ever coached. But he had a heart as big as this room. He would do anything for you. He would try. I mean, if you hit him a ground ball and he muffed it, he would be the first one to say, "Hit me another one, coach." So I did. And on and on and on. And the whole year, he never got a hit. Just couldn't hit, but I played him. My rule of thumb is, you have 13, 14, 15 kids on a team, but you have like 5 kids that can play. So you know what? You want to win, but winning's not everything. So you want everybody to play. So you get those 5 kids, they're your core, and then they're going to start every game, but you're going to have the rest of the kids who are going to, okay, you 4 guys are going to start this game. These guys are going to come in half the game. You guys who sat the first game, you're going to start the next game. So everybody played basically the same amount of time except for your core. And even with the core kids, I sat them, just to be fair.
Right.
Yeah. So this kid just never, ever, he just couldn't hit the ball. And I worked with him. I mean, I went to his house. An hour or 2 hours after practice, I worked with him. His eye-hand coordination just wasn't there. We were playing a game in Southwest Greensburg, and it was the bottom of the 7th inning. Now, that age group only plays 7 innings. Bottom of the 7th inning, bases were loaded, okay, 2 outs. Oh, I'm sorry, it was the top of the 7th. I'm sorry, we were the visiting team. And my little buddy came up, and I'm coaching third base. And the first 2 pitches, he swung and just whiffed at him.
Yeah.
The very next pitch, he hit a base hit to right field. All right. He ended up driving in the go-ahead run, which ended up winning the game.
Yeah.
I was crying. I had tears.
No kidding.
In my eyes, yeah.
Wow.
That.
That's a great story and probably a great way to end the show because the volunteer work that you do to help youth athletics is very much appreciated throughout this county. Jimmy Lee Santarella, thank you very much for being on the Westmoreland Community Connections. You've been listening to Westmoreland Community Connections on 107.1 WHJB and on the web at WHJBFM.com. Join us next week for the next edition of Westmoreland Community Connections. Thanks very much for listening, everyone.
This has been Westmoreland Community Connections, a look at issues and happenings in and around Westmoreland County. Join us again next week on Classic Hits 107.1 WHJB.